Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz paired up as teammates in 2015 and for the first 4 races of 2016. In the plethora of teammate pairings over the years, this one seems to go a bit under the radar, so in this video I'm going to take you through the story of Max Verstappen versus Carlos Sainz. Before I get into it, it must be noted that Verstappen was only 17 years old when he made his F1 debut. Sainz, on the other hand, was 20. Whilst the 3 years may not seem like much, Max was only entering his second full season of single-seater racing, whereas Sainz was entering his 5th. So Sainz definitely had a big advantage in terms of racing experience, but Verstappen was incredibly talented and was there for a reason. Red Bull don't just pick out any old 16, 17-year-old to drive their F1 cars, so there must have been something special about this young Dutchman. Both were immensely impressive on their debuts. Sainz made it into Q3, qualifying 8th, whereas Verstappen narrowly missed out by a couple of tenths of a second. Come race day, that's where both made their mark. Sainz racked up his first points as an F1 driver, finishing 9th. Verstappen, on the other hand, also drove very well, running in a points-paying position, eventually retiring the race with an engine failure. However, in the next race in Malaysia, it was Verstappen's turn to steal the spotlight. In a rain-soaked Q3 in Malaysia, it was Verstappen who qualified P6 with a stunning lap. On Sunday, he converted that great quali result into solid points, finishing 7th, scoring his first points as a Grand Prix driver and thus becoming the youngest ever point scorer in F1's history. Sainz drove a very solid race as well. He narrowly missed out on Q3 due to the changing conditions, but managed to bring home a P8 and adding more points to his tally. The next race in China was underwhelming for Toro Rosso's standards. Neither driver made it into Q3 or scored any points, with Verstappen retiring on lap 52 with the transmission failure. However, it was Verstappen who really showed his quality in that race, regardless of where he was running. He pulled off some outrageous moves at the hairpin, and it was the first sign of the aggressive, relentless competitor inside of him. From Bahrain until Canada, the pendulum swung back in Sainz's favour. He managed to outqualify and outrace Verstappen in each of the 4 races, and put himself on the front foot in the intra-team battle. In that period of time, the standout moment for me was in Spain, where both Toro Rossos locked out the 3rd row of the grid, and Sainz managed to bring home his maiden points at his home race. On the flip side, in Monaco, it didn't go quite as smoothly. Verstappen, who started the race off very well with some great overtakes in turn 1, had a massive accident with Romain Grosjean. Sainz, on the other hand, started from the pit lane after getting into Q3, but managed to bring home a solitary point in P10. From here on, Max really upped his game. He qualified ahead of Sainz for the first time in 4 races at Austria, starting in P7 ahead of Danny Kvyat in the Red Bull. He finished P8, so converted that great qualifying into some solid points. In Britain, a double DNF was quite disappointing for the team, but Max came back strong in Hungary with his career best P4. It was a stunning drive, whilst taking opportunities where he needed to. It was after the summer break where Verstappen started to show what he was really made of. In Spa, he had a grid penalty forcing him to start at the back of the grid, or near the back of the grid. Nonetheless, he made his way up to P8, pulling off some great moves. One in particular stands out against Felipe Nasser, where he overtook the Sauber driver around the outside of Blanchimont. It was a stunning move, and it was a sign of things to come from the young Dutchman. Sainz, on the other hand, suffered from more reliability issues, retiring with a power unit problem on lap 32. After a quiet afternoon in Monza, what followed in Singapore was a pivotal moment in their intra-team battle. Towards the end of the race, after the safety car, Sainz found himself on a new set of tyres against Max, and Toro Rosso ordered Max to let the Spaniard by. Of course, Max refused. Max thought he was the faster of the two drivers, despite being on a much older set. And he was right. Franz Tost, after the race, came out in defence of Verstappen's antics, stating that he was simply the quicker driver and Sainz was unable to close the gap sufficiently. I can't help but feel Red Bull were paying close attention to what happened at Toro Rosso, and this incident may or may not have had much greater significance a few months down the line. It was a much calmer weekend in Japan, with Verstappen beating Sainz to P9, but in Russia the standout moment was probably Sainz's massive accident in quali. Very scary moment for sure. However, in USA, it was Verstappen and Sainz's turn to show their class once again in the wet. Both qualifying and the race happened on the same day, on Sunday. Sainz had a poor qualifying, shunting it in Q1, but Verstappen put in a strong lap, making it to Q3, once again in the wet. He followed that up with another strong race result, finishing P4. Sainz was also up there in the race, making up positions left, right and centre, being right on the pace with Max and the Ferraris in the wet. Carlos eventually brought it home in P6, but a 5-second time penalty for speeding in the pit lane demoted him to P7. It was a great weekend for Toro Rosso, 2 strong points finishes in both drivers, and they would have gone away from that weekend very happy indeed. Verstappen had the edge in both Mexico and Brazil. He outqualified Sainz in both races. He comfortably beat him to a points finish in Mexico, finishing 15 seconds ahead. In Brazil, Sainz unfortunately didn't start the race due to a technical problem, but Max drove another strong race, pulling off some great overtakes, one in particular on Checo Perez into turn 1. However, for the season finale in Abu Dhabi, Sainz got one back on Verstappen, outqualifying and outracing the Dutchman, ending the season on a high. Heading into 2016, both drivers knew the importance of winning the intra-team battle. Red Bull were going to be watching much more closely in 2016, now that both Verstappen and Sainz had some experience under their belts. The season started well in qualifying at Australia. Both Verstappen and Sainz beat Ricciardo and Kvyat in quali, so it was a good start. In the race, Verstappen got a great lap 1 and held up Hamilton for a number of laps. However, as the race progressed, tension started to build on the pit wall. Carlos was stuck behind Palmer for many laps, and Max was closing in with a significant pace advantage. Max was calling for Carlos to move out of the way so Max could have a crack at Palmer, but Carlos refused to give up the position. Carlos eventually made his way past Palmer, but Verstappen followed suit on the same lap, showing he had much more pace in hand. However, Verstappen got very impatient and eventually cracked, making a mistake in the final corner, spinning, and losing all the ground he made up on Sainz. Whilst this showed some immaturity and impatience on Max's part, he once again showed he was the quicker of the two Toro Rosso drivers, something Red Bull would have been paying close attention to. Max came back strong in Bahrain, finishing P6, whereas Sainz eventually retired with collision damage after a clumsy incident with Checo Perez on lap 2. Something of note that Red Bull were paying close attention to, I'm sure, is the fact that Max outpaced Danny Kvyat in that race, finishing ahead of him. In China, Max drove another strong race, fighting with Lewis Hamilton and Kimi Raikkonen at the end of the race and beating Carlos Sainz once again. And finally, in Russia, the final race they did together, whilst Verstappen or Sainz didn't really do much of note, Kvyat made another mistake, causing Sebastian Vettel to crash out on lap 1, and that's where Red Bull drew a line with Kvyat's performances. Now, it was time to decide which of the two Toro Rosso drivers would replace him. Max Verstappen was the one who was chosen. He managed to outpoint, outrace and outqualify Sainz over their time together as teammates. Small margins in it, but he was far younger than the Spaniard and showed a lot of ruthlessness during his time in F1 so far, with his aggressive overtakes. Red Bull were looking for someone with a lot of raw pace and someone they could nurture even more into a top level talent. I feel sorry for Sainz in a way because he was not too far off Max in their time together as teammates. With better reliability, he would have been closer to him in the standings, for instance, so he must feel hard done by, I'm sure. That being said, Max was the quicker of the two drivers as teammates and showed to have much more raw potential, exactly what Red Bull would have wanted. Red Bull thought they could nurture and develop that talent and accelerate his development as a driver. And I can safely say, looking back in hindsight, it's what they did and they made the right decision. Max has become one of the best drivers in F1 and looks ready to challenge for a title in the right car. Sainz, on the other hand, finds himself at Ferrari, and I honestly think he'll have a great year. I don't think he'll beat his teammate Leclerc, but he'll definitely challenge him more than Vettel managed across 2020. Who knows? Max and Sainz might go up against each other once more for a title in the not too distant future. That concludes the story of Max Verstappen versus Carlos Sainz at Toro Rosso. If you enjoyed the video, please smash the like button and subscribe for more F1 content in 2021. Until next time, it's goodbye.